Hi there. Today we're going to talk about 3 things that will make your story unputdownable. Hi, my name is Liesl Hill, otherwise known as Six Figure Storyteller, and I teach authors to write their fiction stories in such a way that every single part of their fiction story will hook the reader. So, have you ever looked at the really popular, beloved mainstream stories? You know, the ones I'm talking about: Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Pride and Prejudice, Twilight, the ones that are very, very popular and do very well. And do you ever wonder what it is that makes them that way? How do they manage to hook such huge audiences who have so much devotion to that story and that fandom? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. Because love them or hate them, the fact that they were able to do this just based on the words written in the books shows that they are doing something correctly. And that is what we need to home in on and try to replicate, but tailored to our own stories. So the first thing that they all have in common that they do correctly is to create emotion. Readers do not sit down to read books because they like plot twists or action or even romance. What they are actually looking for is an emotional experience, okay? That's something that you have to understand. Readers read fiction in order to experience big emotions in a safe space. Obviously, this is not reality for them. They are not actually being chased by the villain or the creature or whatever it is. So it's a very safe space for them, but they want to feel those big emotions. Human beings long to feel and express big emotions, but our society usually represses them and tells us not to show them. But by reading fiction, they are able to experience them. Now, understand when I say you need to have an emotional story, we're not necessarily talking about character emotion. Sure, character emotion is helpful. It's a gateway toward what we're looking for. But when I tell you to put more emotion in your fiction, I do not mean that your character needs to cry more or throw more temper tantrums or anything like that. We're actually talking about the emotional experience for the reader. You need to make sure that there is enough emotion in your story that it evokes that emotional experience for the reader. Your whole job as the author is to make sure that while reading your story, your reader has an emotional experience. And there is a step-by-step checklist kind of a way to do this. It doesn't matter what genre you write, what tropes you write, there are still ways to make sure that your story is evoking that emotion. And if you look at all of the mainstream stories that are very, very beloved by their audiences, this is something that is absolutely true. Again, it doesn't matter what the genre is. Different genres will evoke different emotions, but the emotions are always felt by the audience, and they will go back to that story over and over again to re-experience those emotions. So the number one thing you have to do in order to have an unputdownable story is to make sure that you have enough emotion in the story to give the reader that cathartic experience. And all of the mainstream stories definitely have that. The second thing that they have is something that I call the transformational human template. I know that sounds like a mouthful, but I promise it is not as complicated as it sounds. So you have to understand this about human beings. We are transformational creatures. What I mean by that is that we are constantly changing and transforming. Of course, we have big transformations that have to do with our beliefs and who we marry and what job we end up taking and what we study and things like that. Those are big life transformations. There are also medium transformations, which is usually learning a skill or a hobby or acquiring knowledge of some kind. It helps, maybe, increase our quality of life, but it's also not life-changing. It's just something that we are choosing to do on our own time. Then there's also micro transformations. These are things we can go through on the daily. It can be anything from losing our keys in the morning, stubbing our toe, trying to decide what outfit to wear. They're very, very small things that we have to make decisions over, but we make them every single day, many times per day. And here's the real kicker. The psychological process that all human beings go through in order to make those transformations, whether big, medium, or micro, is always exactly the same. The template, the steps we go through is always exactly the same. Now, why am I telling you this? What does this have to do with fiction writing? Everything. Because true story structure is based on that same transformational human template. Okay? Christopher Vogler, writer of The Writer's Journey, which is one of my favorite craft books, also coined my favorite definition of story. He said, story is a metaphor for a journey that leads to change. I'm going to repeat that, and I want you to really think about it. Let it sink in. Story is a metaphor for a journey that leads to change. Okay? Who is changing? Who's on this journey? It means your character, your protagonist. Story is a metaphor for a character journey that then leads to character change. So that's just a fancy way of saying that the character change is the most important part of your story. And most of us don't plan our stories that way. We always plan from the plot first, which isn't necessarily bad, but it's also not optimal. Your character's change is their internal arc. And what I find is that people either, number one, don't plan that internal arc at all, like never think about it, or two, maybe they do, but it's kind of an afterthought, right? They'll kind of do the whole, oh, my character feels this way at the beginning, they'll feel this way at the end, therefore they change. And that's really not enough. You need to have a very intentional, very deep character change in order to create that catharsis. So remember what I said for number one, you have to create the emotion for the reader. If you don't have a very well thought out internal arc and change for your character, you're not going to be able to create that emotion, period. You have to have it. And that's why it should not be an afterthought, right? Well, once again, if we go back to the mainstream stories that are very beloved by massive audiences, it's because these stories follow the same template of human change. And what that means, you guys, that's actually the secret to great pacing. If you follow the template, then you never have these holes in your story. You never have these boring parts. You can create an actual page turner that the reader will just want to keep reading. And why is that? Because we as human beings live this template every day of our lives, right? Now, most of your readers, they won't recognize that. They don't know what it is. You're not going to get reviews that say, oh, the author missed the third point in the transformational human. No, of course not. They have no idea what that is. What they will say is, it was boring, or the ending didn't really land for me. I wanted to like it, but things like that, right? It's going to be communicated to you in the way that readers know how to communicate, right? But the secret that most people don't know is that when you get reviews like that, or just hopefully you're getting it as feedback before you publish it from your critique group or your beta readers, that you can actually figure out how to fix that, okay? You can figure out how to fill in those holes with the transformational template so that you don't get those kinds of reviews. And once again, the reason these mainstream, really beloved stories are so beloved is because they hit every single part of that template, which naturally draws the reader through the story all the way to the end. So they keep turning pages, and look, your book is unputdownable. Okay, so that's number two, the second thing that makes it unputdownable. Now let's talk about the third thing, and it really piggybacks off number two, and that is having a transformation for your character. So number two is actually following the template all the way through the story, but you need to have that transformation at the end. Once again, because human beings live this template every day, if you can use it to hook them, which you should, then they are going to be very invested in your characters. Human beings love an underdog. Okay, when we see Harry Potter at the beginning of book one being abused by his aunt and uncle and made to sleep under the stairs, we feel badly for him, and we understand injustice, and we understand being treated unfairly, because we've all experienced it at some point in our lives, and we automatically want to see Harry overcome that. We want to see him triumph. We want to see the Dursleys looking stupid, because that would be poetic justice, all of that. Well, guess what? In order to create immense story satisfaction, you have to show the character transforming. We have to start with a problem, something that is suboptimal at the beginning, and then watch them transform. Now, this is usually an emotional transformation. You absolutely can have a physical, plot-based transformation to go along with it, but to create the emotion, it needs to be deeply, deeply emotional, psychological, and or spiritual, okay? Every single one of the mainstream stories that are beloved by audience has this. And if you don't have it, maybe you did a good enough job pulling them through the book and so they get to the end. But if they get to the end and it falls flat for them, what are they going to say? It was okay. Oh, that is the death knell for your book. And not only that, you're not going to be able to keep that reader because you didn't give them enough satisfaction in the story to make them say, I want to read everything this author has because I had such a good emotional experience reading that book, right? So I'm going to tell you guys a little story that happened to me recently, right? I was debating whether to watch a particular series. It doesn't really matter what it was, but it was based on a film. And then years later, they made it into like a full series. I had watched the film and I was not impressed with it, especially with the ending. So I was very skeptical about watching the series. I was thinking if it's based on that same film, I'm not going to like it. I didn't like the film, right? But I went onto IMDb and I started looking at the reviews, not the ones with spoilers, but just the non-spoilery reviews. And the thing that was crazy about it is that these reviews, the good ones, I mean, there was a few that were negative, like there's always going to be a few people that didn't like it, and that's fine. But the ones that were good reviews that did like it, they were not just, oh, this is a great show, make sure and go watch this. Okay. That was not what the reviews were. They were over the top, gushing, glowing reviews like, best sci-fi series of all time, and this watching this show's changed my life, and I will watch this series over and over and over for the rest of my life. I mean, they were almost caricatures because they were so gushing, but they were real reviews, right? Here's the thing you have to understand about reviews and how it connects to audience satisfaction. You do not get those kinds of gushing reviews unless the audience was very, very, very satisfied with the end of the story. All right. You can actually get more reviews volume wise if the ending sucks. Okay. Case in point, Game of Thrones. When the ending does not resonate well, you've just caused a problem amongst your readers and they want to complain about it. So you can get a lot of reviews, but they will be negative, right? If you want those gushing reviews, that only comes one way. And that is if there's a tremendous amount of emotion and if they are very, very satisfied with the ending, which usually means it's happy in some regard. It doesn't mean that there isn't tragedy involved. In fact, it is my personal opinion that there should be a lot of tragedy involved in order for them to really feel the happy ending. But either way, they need to be very satisfied with the ending, okay? Those reviews are what made me decide to watch the series, and it is seriously one of the best stories I have ever come across. It's one of my very favorites, and I was so glad that I discovered it, okay? So the reviews were correct, and let me promise you, the ending of that was very satisfying. And I've read articles that have been written about the series ender of the series, and people agree almost across the board that it is one of the best series finales of all time. Okay. Once again, that should tell you something. If you want to create that with your books, you have to have that transformation. You have to have the emotion, and you need to show the change over time with the human template. Okay. That is what will make your story unputdownable. That will give it the potential to become a bestseller and to become beloved by your audience. If any of those three things are missing, it's not going to happen. It's just not. So as we close, I want to say that it absolutely drives me insane how so many people in our space, the fiction author space, just teach that you should just start writing and keep going. Write one book and then write another one, and eventually one day you'll become good enough that all the stars will align and you'll have a runaway bestseller. Okay. I understand. I will give them grace because I understand that they say that because they don't know how to teach it any better than that. But there is a step-by-step process that you can use to make sure this stuff gets put into your story, okay? We're not talking about what to write in your story. That's not it. Any genre you're working with, any tropes, it doesn't matter. This stuff is universal, and you can still use a step-by-step process to make your story, your genius story that you have already come up with, the best, most emotional, most satisfying version of itself for your readers, okay? It's what I call the unputdownable code, as in a secret code to writing highly emotional, unputdownable fiction that most authors are not even aware of, okay? It's based on getting the emotion into your book, of course, but how we do that is based on psychology. This is something I've been studying for close to 20 years now, okay? So if you are at all interested in learning this, in having me teach you the step-by-step process for how to make your story very emotional and unputdownable and teach you the secret code that most people don't know, I am getting ready to launch a program where I'm going to show you that over the course of 12 weeks. Each week we will do a different part of story. I will show you exactly what you need to do to make that aspect of your story unputdownable. It is an A to Z step-by-step process. And then I will also give you feedback on it. Okay, so if that is something you're interested in, click the link in the caption or show notes below and fill out the form. It is an application form. It has all the information there that you need, and I will be going through them myself. But this starts the first week in July, so you don't have a whole lot of time to get your applications in. So if you want to learn this, make sure and check that out, and I hope to see you very soon inside the Unputdownable Code cohort. All right? Thank you so much for being here with me today. I hope this was helpful to you. Make sure that you are doing everything you can to get these three things into your story so that you can make it unputdownable, because the world always needs more unputdownable stories. All right? See you next time. Bye.